I say, are we
You are
live? We're ready?
You are live.
I am so happy. Hi, I'm Eka Kapiotis here on behalf of the Front Row Women's Resource Center, and I am really thrilled to have Melanie Ford back to do a follow-up because she's written a couple more books, and we've been anxiously awaiting. We had an original time scheduled in the spring that didn't work out, so here we are in October, and we were worried it would be cold and who knows what.
And in my neck of the woods, it could be snowing for all you know.
Right, right. Well, welcome, Melanie.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and thanks everybody for coming out. Nice to see you all. Nice to be back here.
Great. Well, I am really excited because when you came before, you were only talking about the first of your trilogy, Hillwilla.
Mm-hmm. The Reinventing Hillwilla is number 3 in the Hillwilla
Number 3.
trilogy.
So can you just give us like a 2-second synopsis on your trilogy, and then we'll dive into the new one.
Okay, the trilogy, if maybe some of you have read the other books, if not, it doesn't matter that much. I wrote Reinventing Hillwilla, which is number 3, as a standalone, but you'll get more out of it if you've read the other 2 first. And basically what all 3 books do is chart the evolution of a misfit, Beatrice Desmond, who's a northern urban transplant to a remote corner of West Virginia. And when the series starts, she's she's suicidal, she's alcoholic, she's depressed, she can't fit in with the locals at all. And the books, bit by bit, she starts opening up and evolving. And part of the reason is because 2 people come into her life. Clara, a local teenager who is in need of temporary rescue from an abusive family situation. And Beatrice, long story how that happens, she takes on the role. But Beatrice provides that rescue and they evolve. A mother-daughter relationship develops. So that's one of the things we chart, the course of this relationship. The other person that enters Beatrice's life is Tanner Fordyce, who is a part-time resident of the same remote county where Beatrice lives. And he's got kind of a dark past. The 2 of them collaborate, they get to know each other by collaborating on a writing project and hate each other from the get-go. Eventually that morphs into a productive working relationship, then friendship, and then a very rocky on-again, off-again romance. By the time, so we watch Beatrice evolve, open up, become more emotionally available. We watch the course of these 2 important relationships. And basically all the same characters are in book number 3. And these relationships are evolving. But the course is seldom smooth. And Clara's, the young girl's biological mother, re-enters the picture, hatches a scheme that endangers both Clara and Beatrice. And even perhaps the long-term consequences are worse because this plot really strains Beatrice's and Clara's relationship. So we watch as this evolves. And there's a light at the end of the tunnel. But in the meantime, as Beatrice is going through upheaval, she is buoyed by her animal companion. She still has her small herd of llamas. And she still has her faithful canine companion, Ralph,
yeah.
who is a character in his own right.
Yes.
And Ralph's time is winding down, but he's still a presence in Reinventing Hillwilla.
And
So
I have to
that's
say, it was so satisfying the way, you never know when you're reading a trilogy. Sometimes they bog down at a certain point, and it did not.
Oh, thank
None
you.
of your books bogged
Oh,
down
thank
at
you.
all. And you have, you're talking about 4 characters, but there's like 20.
I've got lots of characters.
And
yes.
and the really cool thing, I hate to admit this, but if I'm reading a book where there's a lot of characters, I just glaze over and kind of forget who's. But the way you create them, somehow they are memorable. Like I know
thank you.
exactly who you're talking about and their story and how they got involved.
Well, I think there's a segue to the Irish novel, which is a completely different subject. And I think storytelling is hardwired into Irish DNA. And I can remember so many anecdotes. This relates to your talking about the characters. I can remember so many anecdotes from family history, going back to the Irish immigrant experience in the mid-19th century into the 20th century, and there was lots of stuff to mine, lots of tragedy in Irish history to mine. So, I mean, there was good grist for their stories, these family stories, but we had great storytellers, because it was never just about the pathos, never just about the historical events. All these stories were leavened by a heavy dose of usually dark humor, a lot of irreverence, and the quirkiest characters. These were ancestors who were dead decades before I was born. And I felt like I knew them. They were, they all, and it seemed like one of them, they always had some distinctive quirk. Someone would have a club foot, someone would have a lisp, someone would, have really curly hair, whatever it was. And I got to know how they talked. So that was my background. I got really involved in these characterizations from family stories, and I think it made it easier for me.
Well, I mean, they come to life in your books.
Oh, they come to life in my daily living, too. They visit me.
Okay. Well, that's the new book we're talking about,
all
right?
of them. All of them.
Okay.
They wake me up. If I'm not writing them properly, I will wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, make a pit stop or something, and can't go back to sleep because there they are, hanging inside my head.
I was wondering about that, how you keep
Go
them.
away. and they don't. They won't until I get it right.
Okay.
Writing fiction is not conducive to mental health.
Well, and some of the characters that you have are really quirky, but they're so real.
Well, people are quirky.
Yes, they are, aren't they? And so, well, I wanted to say, because the Hillwilla series is all written in small chapters. So, and each one has a very distinct piece of the story, and so it moves really fast. I mean, the development and the characters just come to life, and they move really fast. It never bogs down. It was really wonderful.
I think I tend to have a very visual process, so I tend to see things the way in scenes, and a scene doesn't go on forever, so that makes for short chapters.
It was perfect. I mean, I really enjoyed them. Anybody else read them? And yeah. Everybody's nodding and smiling. Yeah. Good. Yeah. So, thank you for talking about that. Now, your new one is very different.
Yes,
the chapters are a little bit longer. It's a little more.
And it's a whole nother period and culture.
A whole other period. So.
Well, I started writing. Okay, those of you who've read anything that I've written, probably realize that I enjoy writing characters who are misfits and charting their struggle to find some sense of belonging in their lives, often by unconventional means, putting together odd groups of people for a sense of family. And it occurred to me that the immigrant is an archetype of the misfit, someone who's trying to fit into a new culture. And again, as I said before, I grew up with all these stories about the Irish immigrant experience in Boston. And I had some really good storytellers in the family. So it was only a matter of time that the writer in me realized that I had great grist for a novel, but how to work it. I started work on that book, even though it was the fourth one published. It was the first one I started work on more than 20 years ago. And I initially thought I would write a fictionalized biography of my maternal grandfather. He had kind of an up from bootstraps rise. Not that he was anybody particularly prominent, but considering the misery that he came from, he done good. But he just wasn't coming together. I didn't feel a connection to him. My grandparents he died when I was 3. I didn't really know my grandparents. And then I thought, well, what if I switch to the female perspective? And if it's tough for a male immigrant, it's going to be even tougher probably for a female immigrant. And one thing that I started making traction at that point. And I came up with 2 characters, likely characters. I also realized at that point that I didn't want to keep too close to anything biographical. I wanted to put some distance between myself and my actual ancestors, but I still wanted to use those life events that I used to hear chapter and verse on, and just use them, throw them up against fictional characters that I created and see how they reacted. So I knew I was onto something there, and with a female focus. And then I stumbled across a really interesting factoid from my research, and that was around the turn of the 20th century, more than half of Irish immigrants to the United States were single women.
Wow.
Which is mind-boggling.
It is.
It is unreplicated by any other ethnic group at the time.
Wow.
And so I started thinking, okay, and they also ended up having, the Irish are notorious for having very late marriage age. And so these were not women who were coming off the boat and snagging a husband and boom, they got a roof over their heads. Hell no, they had to find a way to keep their heads above water. And when you consider that at the turn of the 20th century, for women who came from families that had been in the United States for generations, families of means, they were hard-pressed to find any kind of employment. And so that got me thinking, there's an extra layer of dramatic tension here. Yeah. And for 2 of my 3 primary characters, they remain singletons for a big chunk of their lives. So this is a constant leitmotif. How do I keep a roof over my head? And these are working class folks. These aren't folks of any means. So I knew I was gaining traction there. And it had legs. But it still spent more time gathering dust inside a shelf, a cupboard, than the pages flying off. And it wasn't until about 6 years ago that I looked inside another cupboard. And I focused on what was in there. And it was a family artifact in my family since the early 1800s. Landed in my hands, passed down from an aunt in around 1980, a Waterford decanter. And it is the very same decanter that you see on the cover of this book.
And I notice, if you don't mind my pointing this out, that I do believe it's sitting on a mat that's made from your llamas, which you...
Not my llamas, but it is something I wove.
Something you wove, okay.
Because I wanted it to look old-timey, so... So there it is, an old-timey mat, and it also happens to be sitting on an antique piece of furniture in my house, which is a Civil War-era washstand. Not that that has anything to do with the book.
Yeah.
But okay, so I started looking at this decanter, and it's a little the worse for wear. It's got chips on it. It's very cloudy, the crystal, which is indicative of a high lead content, which was typical of the products of the Waterford factory before 1850. And all those little facts make it appealing, but that wasn't what grabbed me. That wasn't what made me know I had to include this decanter in this work. It was the story that came with it. And I'll give you the bare bones version. The bare bones version is that a great-great-uncle carried this decanter over in a sailing ship in steerage in 1848.
Wow.
Okay, those few facts open a huge array of questions. 1848 was at the height of the Irish potato famine. The branch of the family that came over at that time were tenant farmers in Cork, which was the epicenter of the potato blight. Cork was also the epicenter of a national tragedy, an upheaval of just devastating proportions. By some estimates, Ireland lost 40% of its population in one generation, bracketing the potato famine. 20% lost to death and disease, death from starvation and from diseases and from lack of shelter, because these people were being evicted when they couldn't pay their rent in crops. Another 20%, like my family, emigrated to the United States, Canada, and Australia. Okay, so you have this small, it was a relatively small family group. and they're traveling in 1848. They're probably half starved, and they've got a crystal decanter with them? What? I mean, these were people who, even before the potato blight, wouldn't have had very many resources. How did they get their hands on it to begin with? Second, why did they choose to take a piece of crystal finery, something as fragile, on this long sea voyage? Third, and I withheld one of the little facts, the great-great-uncle who took it over, and every anecdote about him is that he was the custodian of the decanter. He was 9 years old at the time.
Wow.
What is a child and a boy doing? I mean, does he have an affinity for it? I don't know the story. I don't know any of the answers to these questions. But the questions themselves just filled me with a sense of wonder and mystery and got the wheels churning. And I finally decided, I kind of narrowed the focus. And this is when I really started making progress with the writing. And I used the decanter as kind of, I'm going to play on a metaphor, it's crystal, and I use it as kind of a lens to narrow my focus. In literary terms, it became a MacGuffin, a plot device that links together three disparate fictional Irish-American families whose connection is not widely known. And that's because their common bond is weighed down by a huge array of family secrets, outright lies, scandals, and, if you will, decanted truths. So that's the background to
It's an amazing story. There are so many pieces that you bring in, and so it starts in 1848.
Well,
it spans.
It spans for, well,
and that goes to 1960, doesn't it?
Right,
in the end.
right. But the main action takes place between 1890 and the 1930s.
Yeah.
1890, whatever. But we have these, and the first book, the first part plays out from 1930 to 1936, and then we go back to see the backstory of some of these characters we've gotten to know, and that's basically in the 1890s. And then we fast forward again to 1936, 37, and we fill in some of the gaps as the characters themselves are learning how they're connected.
It is really fascinating to just go back into that time and see how women lived and people lived and what,
I was enormously, again, the storytelling, but I had a couple of aunts who would write down childhood tales that they remembered, down to the games that they played. And I mean, this was years before I became a fiction writer, but I saved all of these. And so I've got some authentic early 20th century words, conversations, pastimes, to give it authenticity.
Okay. And again, it moves quickly. I mean, it doesn't bog down, even though, I mean, like you said, some of the things in there are pretty heavy. I mean, they're pretty, in depth, or I'm not sure the right word, maybe you can.
Well, there's a lot of pathos in there because there's a lot of pathos in Irish history, but they're Irish, so they laugh a lot too.
Exactly, yes.
When the hangman's noose is coming, they're still laughing.
And drinking.
And drinking, yes.
Right. Yeah, no, I thought it was wonderful.
Would you care for me to read a...
Oh, that would be great.
When I mentioned that I found the decanter kind of got the juices flowing, around the same time I came up with the third primary female character. And I said before that I like writing misfits. Well, Leah gives a new meaning to the word misfit. Her name is Leah Gavigan. And in addition to feeling that second-class citizenship from the immigrant experience, Leah has second sight. And she has been plagued since earliest childhood with these visions, some of which come true, maybe they don't, but many of them truly disrupt her ability to function in the here and now. And so her freak flag just flies all over the place. As she gets older, she learns how to handle them better, and in fact, she harnesses them for a career in the arts. The excerpt I'm going to read is from the first chapter, and it introduces us to Leah Gavigan and gives us a little sneak peek of the decanter. Leah Gavigan was composed of many dreams, many memories, many identities. Dreaming was one way of tuning out the din that constantly enveloped their neighborhood in the Dorchester section of Boston. In the early years of the 20th century, an apartment building might have lacked today's electronic babble. But with all those people bumping against one another in all those railroad rooms, quiet was a rare commodity. So Leah dreamed away the noise, not only at night. She saw no reason why she shouldn't welcome the visions into her frontal cortex when the sun was high in the soot-stained sky. But there was one dream above all that stood out. It was, simply put, fascinating. Unfortunately, it rivaled her rowdy neighborhood for noisiness with endless chatter, laughter, screams, farts, grunts, and belches. Leah also heard retching and coughing and snapping and creaking and howling. She was glad her ears and eyes were the only senses engaged. She would not have liked to inhale the smells that should accompany what she saw and heard. With the dream's first vision, the dreamer had no tools of interpretation. A toddler sleeping in a trundle bed in Dorchester has no way of understanding the sensory input from deep within a sailing vessel. It took years of dreaming, reading, and schooling to identify the venue, to understand that great linen sails would snap in the wind, that the wind itself often assumed a tormented human voice, that a wooden hull would creak in protest against a rolling, pitching sea. The dream didn't have much of a plot, but offered vignettes of life in steerage. The passenger sharing visions with the dreamer would retreat to a recess tucked behind a hanging lantern. Eventually, Leah realized her guide was a boy. She never saw his face any more than she could see her own face without benefit of a mirror, but she could see his short, thin limbs. Moreover, that recess appeared too restricted to accommodate an adult. In the privacy of his hidey hole, the boy would invariably remove his boots briefly and rub his feet as if in pain. Naked, the right foot twisted horribly inward. The deformity so repelled the young dreamer that she sometimes would shake herself awake. Eventually, she realized the scary sight was worth tolerating. After the boy finished rubbing his feet, his grubby fingers would reach for a burlap bag tucked even more deeply into the recess. His hands would then extract something swathed in oilcloth. Once unwrapped, the contents exploded with shards of lantern light in a dizzying array of colors. Looking down at the object in the boy's lap, Leah could see his chest and belly expand briefly. Then those small hands would rewrap the light-filled wonder in the filthy oilcloth and return it to the burlap sack. With a shove from his good foot, he would push the bag deeper into the ship's cavity. The hidden object, a decanter, filled the darkest corners of the dreamer's soul with light, with beauty, with hope. It stirred every corpuscle in her blood.
Yeah.
It's a little spooky setting.
You are an amazing writer.
Oh, God love you.
No, you really are. I mean, and I know that you were a ghostwriter for 30 years. A hard-working one, I take it?
Deadlines that were 2 weeks before they were due.
And so you have, you've worked really hard to become this good, I think is what I'm...
Well, I mean, there's not a direct correlation between nonfiction deadline writing, but all writing is creative to some extent. And I think the most important part is I knew I could... Well, I've written 2 books before any of my fiction works as ghostwritten books, so I knew I could write a book. But it was precisely because of the ghostwriting experience, it was time to write in my own voice. And I wanted to, the world of fiction, I mean, my background, my academic background is literature, so it was time.
Yeah.
And I wanted to get really deeply involved in a world where I can make the outcome happen exactly the way I want it, where I put them through hell, but the good are rewarded and the bad get their just desserts. That makes life makes sense to me. The fictional world makes sense.
So let's see did anyone want to have any comments or any questions?
Well, I have not read any of your books.
We can solve that. I've got a whole bunch of them.
But I'm curious, the name Hillwilla, where does that come from?
Okay. It comes from if you may recall, I said that this character, Beatrice Desmond, she's an outsider. She has, he ends up being a boyfriend, Tanner. And at first they don't like each other at all. And he sees that she just doesn't quite, again, she's a misfit. She's a misfit in several ways. She's not a local, but she also doesn't quite fit the role of an affluent outsider who comes in and plays Lady Bountiful. And so he said, you really live like a hillbilly, except no one would ever mistake you for a hillbilly because of the way you talk. And so you're kind of like a Hill Wilhelmina Hillwilla. And then he sees her bristle, and then he uses that name constantly to torment her.
That's good.
Had you finished the trilogy before you started?
No. Like I said, I started the writing on Decanted Truths more than 20 years ago. But again, it was like 6 years or so that I really started gaining traction. I had wrote the first two Hillwillas, and then I just had a head full of steam for the Irish novel. And I finished that before I started the Reinventing Hillwilla. Even though the two were published, Reinventing Hillwilla and Decanted Truths were both published last November, which is bizarre to promote two books at once.
Yeah. Any other questions? Comments?
Well, I just think it's compelling of your ideas or what goes around in your head, that you actually had an idea 20 years and held on to it and built on it, and after that. I just think that's amazing.
Well, I mean, that's
I can't hold on to a thought for an hour.
Again, it was easier. It wasn't quite so big a feat because this is part of my family history. But the other thing is, writers are crazy, and once an idea settles in there, it infests the brain, and you have to do something with it. And just like I said, these visitations I would get from the characters. You will write that and you will get it right. When I finish the Irish novel, I have a baby cup. Remember the silver baby? Do people still have silver baby cups? And I have a baby cup from a character who it's from an ancestor, an uncle, on whom one of the characters is based. I haven't talked about him yet. And he died at a young age, decades before I was born. But for some reason, I have his baby cup. And I as I was writing, I felt a big connection with him, even though he was a kid when he died. And I remember raising the baby cup. I'd finished. I'd done the first draft, and I put it down. I had printed it up. I put it down on my desk, and I raised the baby cup, and I said, "Here, Joe, this is for you." I got a full body jolt of electricity. I just got it again thinking of it. I mean, it was kind of like there was someone there who was saying. So when you have stuff like that in the background, it's easy to keep it in your head.
And I was wondering, how do you keep all your characters straight? I know some people create vignettes and things, but do you just have them in your head?
They're just so real. I mean, I think it helps that they all have these quirks, so it's easy to remember them. It's never been a problem. The only thing that's a problem is keeping dates straight, and especially with this, because there's a real timeline for, if he's the older brother and so was born in such and such a time, that in terms of justifying events, and I did have to go back and correct a lot of things where I kind of screwed up the dates.
Well, and then you give that handy-dandy list of marriages and births.
Right. My publisher thought that was necessary, and I agree, but I was worried about putting, do I have, it is in the beginning, right?
Yeah, right.
Because
in the
originally I
beginning.
had it in the back, because there are, if you scrutinize those dates too carefully, there are a couple of reveals that I don't want the reader to know until I'm ready to tell them, so.
Page 412. In the middle of the night, I'm like trying to go to sleep, and holy
Eka is
cow.
referring to, and I got her permission, I used her last name for an off-screen character. And I think every fiction writer does this. We plant Easter eggs. And
That was so funny.
So that's your Easter egg.
And it was on the front. I just didn't even notice it.
Well,
It's
I
in
mean,
the list.
yeah. And I have a bunch of Easter eggs for family and friends. If they pay attention, they will find, oh, that's so much fun to do.
Yeah. Well, I think it's time to wrap things up. Anybody else want to make a comment or anything?
Well,
No?
I will make one comment that
Yeah.
I have a bunch of books, all 4 of them. If you're interested in buying them, I'm selling them at a discount, and I'll happily sign them for you. So after we close up shop here, we can go over to the table and look at books.
Great. Okay. And I can't thank you enough for coming. You've
I
come a
can't
long
thank you
way
enough for
again.
having me. It's so much fun. These are the kind of event. I spend so much time in social media promotion, which is boring. And for a writer who spends time inside her head, that's the makings of an introvert, and they don't make good salesmen. But this kind of an environment where you have engaged people, this is great. I need more of these.
Oh, good.
So thank you all for coming.
We'll have you back.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Melanie. I appreciate it.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you again, too. And so before we totally end, I know that there are some upcoming events. In December, we're going to have a holiday party. And in November, we have a membership.
A membership.
I did not do my homework to get the date, but FRWRC. Did you want to say anything about it?
The November members meeting and social is Tuesday, the 19th of November, right here. And anybody who's a member can come, or you can join. But it's a great time to hear what we're doing and what we plan to do next year. And then in December, on the 17th, we will have our holiday party, again right here. And we had a wonderful time last year, and we have the same caterer, and we hope to have a great time this year too. And that's open to everybody.
Great.
That is a
thank you.
ticketed event, but you can get information on our website and of course our Facebook page.
Thank you so much.
And we won't have any more of these this year.
No.
So
Am I
this
the
is
last
the very
one?
last
Yeah.
woman gathering. We have a luncheon, a networking luncheon next week, and then we're done, and we won't start up again until January. But I'm sure Eka will plan a great year next year.
And in January, we will have a wine tasting for the
That's
woman
right.
gathering. So that'll be very interesting anyway.
Do I get to Facebook Live that?
Huh?
That will be Facebook Live too?
Yeah. Why not? And I want to thank our videographer, Jen Avery. Yay. And Beth Waller of What Matters for giving us a space. And thank you all for joining us. Hope to see you next time.